roar of laughter felt like it could shatter the walls of the lecture hall. Claire Morrison stood frozen in front of 200 students, her voice catching mid-sentence as the group in the back row hooted and hollered. One of them, a broad-shouldered senior named Tyler, held up a crudely edited photo of her face pasted onto the body of a swimsuit model, his friends howling as they passed it around. The image flickered briefly on the projector. Someone had hacked the HDMI feed before she yanked the cable out. The damage was done. Every smirk and whisper felt like a dagger twisting in her chest. At 34, Claire had built a reputation as one of Westlake University's most dedicated lecturers. She poured herself into her students' success, often staying late to help those who struggled. But for months now, Tyler and his two buddies, Brett and Lucas, had been pushing her buttons. First, it was snide comments during lectures, then mocking her research topics. Now, this. The escalation wasn't just juvenile, it was calculated humiliation. She forced herself to keep speaking her tone steady, but her hands gripped the lectern so tightly her knuckles whitened. Inside, she was trembling. Not from fear, at least not entirely, but from the volcanic pressure building in her chest. The lecture dragged on like a nightmare, each minute an eternity, until the bell finally rang and the crowd dispersed, leaving her alone in the echoing hall. Her colleague Mark, from the history department, appeared at the door. "Claire, are you okay?" "I'm fine." She cut him off, her voice sharp but shaking. She wasn't fine. She could still hear their laughter echoing in her ears. She could still feel the burn of every pair of eyes that had watched her humiliation unfold. As she gathered her notes, her mind replayed every cruel smirk, every shove of the verbal knife they'd given her over the past semester. Tyler, Brett, Lucas, 3 names she could barely say without tasting bitterness. She had always told herself to rise above, to be the professional. But that voice, the one that said, "Ignore them," was getting quieter. Another voice, one she hadn't heard in years, was getting louder. It was the voice she'd known in her 20s, back when she trained at a small boxing gym, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in her hometown. Back when life had knocked her around and she'd learned the hard way that you either swing back or stay on the floor. She hadn't thrown a punch in over a decade, but as she walked down the hall toward her office, head held high but jaw clenched, that old electric hum was returning to her muscles. Her humiliation was still raw, but beneath it, something else was simmering resolve. She sat in her office, staring out the window at the quad below, watching students scatter to their next classes. Her reflection in the glass didn't look like the woman who had just been the punchline of a cruel joke. It looked like someone who was done taking it. Tomorrow, she knew the bullies would come back. They always did. And when they did, she wouldn't be the same. Claire woke the next morning, still tasting the bitterness of yesterday's humiliation. Sleep had been thin, more a restless tangle of memories and flashes of anger than real rest. She made her coffee extra strong, staring into the dark swirl as if it might offer answers. Outside her apartment, the fall air was crisp, the kind that normally cleared her mind. But today, it only sharpened her resolve. At Westlake, she walked across campus with measured steps, avoiding the path by the student lounge where Tyler and his friends usually lingered. Her mind was working in quiet calculation, not fear. They had taken something from her in that lecture hall, not just her dignity, but the unspoken authority she held over her class. If she didn't take it back, Every other student would know she could be pushed. By mid-morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. Heard they're planning something else today. Heads up. The words lit a fuse inside her. The old Claire, the one who avoided conflict, would have prayed the rumor was wrong. But now, she wanted them to make the mistake. She needed them to. Between lectures, she slipped into the university's small fitness center, a place she hadn't stepped foot in for years. The smell of sweat and disinfectant brought back memories instantly. She wrapped her hands with the rough cotton of an old set of boxing wraps she found in her tote bag, a relic from her gym days she had kept without knowing why. Shadowboxing in the corner, she felt the muscle memory kick in. Her footwork was rusty, but her strikes still carried that snap, that thud of power. Every jab was a release of the pressure she'd been carrying since the semester began. By the time her afternoon lecture approached, she was ready not just to teach, but to face them. She walked into the room early, her posture tall, her voice steady as she prepared her slides. She wasn't going to provoke them, but she also wasn't going to shield herself with avoidance anymore. The three of them arrived just before class started. Tyler swaggered in first, his grin smug, Brett and Lucas following close behind. They took their usual seats at the back, exchanging whispers and low chuckles. Claire ignored them, starting her lecture on 20th century American literature as if they didn't exist. Halfway through, she noticed Tyler fiddling with his phone, angling it so Brett could see. She didn't need to guess they were up to something. She kept her eyes on the room. Her voice even, but inside she was winding a spring. She remembered the words of her old trainer Frank. "You don't swing first, Morrison, but when you swing, make it count." When the bell rang, most students filtered out. She could feel the trio lingering. She took her time gathering her things, heart steady but watchful. Tyler finally leaned back in his chair, smirking. "See you in the parking lot, Professor. Got something for you." She didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge him with a word. But as she walked toward the door, her mind was already drawing the scene like a storyboard. The breaking point wasn't coming, it had already arrived. The sun was dipping low when Claire stepped out of the building, the faculty parking lot bathed in the orange glow of early evening. The breeze carried the faint scent of cut grass from the quad, but underneath it was the heavier, stale smell of cigarette smoke. Tyler, Brett, and Lucas were waiting by her car, leaning against the hood like they owned it. Evening. Professor Tyler called, dragging out the syllables with a lazy grin. Brett flicked his lighter open and shut the metallic click, echoing in the empty lot. Lucas just smirked, his eyes scanning her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. She walked toward them with deliberate calm, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Move," she said simply, setting her bag down by her feet. Tyler laughed. "What's the rush? We were just thinking you might want to see this." He held up his phone, and there it was, another doctored image, this one even worse than yesterday's. Claire didn't glance at it long enough to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "Pathetic," she said, her voice flat. Brett stepped forward close enough that she could smell the cheap beer on his breath. "You got a mouth on you for someone so small." His tone wasn't loud, but it was loaded a predator's whisper. Lucas circled to her other side. "We just thought you might need some extra attention." It was the kind of moment where most people's pulse would spike, where instincts screamed to flee. But Claire's heart rate stayed measured. Her stance shifted ever so slightly, knees' soft weight balanced on the balls of her feet. Her old boxing trainer's voice was in her head again. "You don't give ground, not unless it's to set a trap." She let them talk, let them think they were in control. Tyler stepped in front of her, tilting his head. What, no lecture this time? Guess we finally shut you up. It happened so fast, even she barely registered the movement. Her left hand shot forward, smacking the phone from his hand, the clatter of plastic and glass skidding across the asphalt. Tyler's eyes widened, but before his brain could catch up, her right fist came up from her hip in a tight arc, smashing into the side of his jaw. The crack of knuckles against bone echoed through the lot, and Tyler stumbled backward like he'd been hit by a truck, his legs tangling as he collapsed onto the hood of Brett's car. Brett froze, eyes wide, lighter, still in his hand, but no spark coming. Lucas took an instinctive step back, his smirk gone. Claire's breathing was steady, her gaze locked on them like a hawk. "I told you to move," Tyler groaned, clutching his jaw. His earlier swagger shattered. Claire didn't wait for a reply. She picked up her bag, stepped around them, and unlocked her car. The silence behind her was almost satisfying enough to match the punch itself. Almost. She knew this wasn't over, not yet. But the fear in their eyes told her the balance had shifted. By the next morning, the parking lot incident had already begun its quiet migration through the campus rumor mill. Claire could feel it in the stares that lingered a little too long, the whispered conversations that paused when she walked by. She didn't seek the attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. The power dynamic had shifted, and the bullies knew it. Tyler didn't show up for her morning lecture. Brett and Lucas did. But they were quieter than she'd ever seen them. No snickering, no whispered jokes, just eyes glued to their desks. It would have been satisfying if not for the tension still coiled in the room. She knew humiliation breeds resentment, and resentment could turn dangerous. During her lunch break, Mark intercepted her in the faculty lounge. "Heard you had a run-in yesterday," he said carefully. His eyes carried more curiosity than judgment. "Something like that," she replied, stirring her coffee without looking up. "You know they'll try to spin it," he warned. "Make you out to be the aggressor." She met his gaze. "Let them try." By mid-afternoon, the campus security office called her in. Officer Daniels, a stocky man in his 50s, with a voice like gravel, gestured for her to sit. "We got a complaint from a student named Tyler Hall," he said, glancing down at a thin file. "Claims you assaulted him in the parking lot." Claire leaned back in her chair. "Did he mention the part where he and his friends were blocking my car, showing me sexually harassing images they'd made of me, and attempting to intimidate me?" Daniels studied her for a moment, then scribbled something in his notes. "We've had prior reports about them," he admitted. "Still, it's going to go to the dean's office. You might want to be ready." "I'm always ready," she said evenly. That evening, her email pinged with a meeting request from Dean Whitaker for the following morning. Claire spent the night going over every detail in her mind, not with anxiety, but with clarity. She knew what happened. She knew the line they crossed, and she knew the exact moment she'd decided enough was enough. When she arrived at the dean's office the next day, Tyler was already there, jaw slightly swollen. His friends flanking him like a courtroom entourage. His voice was loud, all exaggerated hand gestures and feigned outrage. She just snapped, "Out of nowhere. Hit me like some kind of street thug." Claire sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap, her posture calm but unyielding. Dean Whitaker. "With all due respect, I've endured weeks of targeted harassment from these three. Yesterday, they physically cornered me in the parking lot and displayed explicit images they had created without my consent. I acted to create space and ensure my safety. Whitaker looked between them. Do you have proof of this harassment? Claire opened her bag and slid a small flash drive across the desk. Campus security cameras, east parking lot. Yesterday, 6:42 p.m. You'll see exactly what happened. The bullies' faces drained of color. For the first time since this began, Claire felt the real momentum shift, not just in her favor, but against them. The footage spoke louder than any words Claire could have mustered. On the screen, the grainy black and white security video showed her walking toward her car, the three men blocking her path. Tyler's phone came out, Brett leaning in, Lucas circling around. Even without audio, the intimidation was clear. Then the moment her hand knocking the phone away, the clean arc of her punch, Tyler staggering back like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Dean Whitaker paused the video and leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Hall, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Jennings, he said. His tone clipped. This is a serious breach of university conduct. You are suspended pending a full disciplinary review. Leave my office now. The three shuffled out. Tyler shooting Claire one last venomous look, but it lacked the swagger it once had. The door shut behind them, leaving the room blessedly quiet. Whitaker turned to Claire. Professor Morrison, I appreciate you bringing the evidence. You won't face disciplinary action. However, he hesitated. I would advise caution. You have every right to defend yourself, but I understand, Claire interrupted. Believe me, I didn't go looking for this. As she left the dean's office, the weight she'd been carrying for weeks began to lift. She knew this wasn't the fairy tale ending, where bullies vanish forever. Life rarely worked that way. But they wouldn't try her again. And the rest of the campus had seen exactly what happened when someone pushed her too far. In the following days, her lectures returned to normal, though a new undercurrent of respect, maybe even awe, ran through her classrooms. Students who had previously stayed silent now spoke up more, their eyes meeting hers without the caution they'd once held. It wasn't fear she inspired, but something stronger, the knowledge that she wouldn't let anyone diminish her or them in that space. Mark stopped by her office later that week, leaning in the doorway with a half smile. Heard you've got a bit of a legend growing around here, he teased. Legend, huh? She said, raising an eyebrow. Yeah. The prof who dropped a guy twice her size in one punch. People are talking. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. That's not the part I want them to remember. Mark tilted his head. What part, then, that I didn't let them decide who I was? That night, walking to her car, under the soft glow of the lot's lampposts, she passed the exact spot where everything had gone down. The memory was still sharp, but it no longer carried the sting. It carried a lesson. She'd been tested, humiliated, cornered, and she had stood her ground. The cold autumn air filled her lungs as she unlocked her car. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled thump of a campus party carried on the wind. Claire smiled faintly, her reflection in the car window, looking back at her. Not the woman who'd been mocked in front of 200 students, but the one who'd refused to stay that way. Some reputations are earned in the classroom. Others are earned when the lecture is over. Life rarely hands us perfect moments to stand up for ourselves. More often, it tests us in the least convenient, most humiliating ways possible. Claire's story is a reminder that silence in the face of cruelty only feeds it. Standing your ground doesn't always mean fighting back physically. It means refusing to surrender your dignity, even when fear tries to bargain it away. Bullies thrive on power they haven't earned. The moment you take that power back, they lose their grip. Whether in a lecture hall, a workplace, or any corner of life, courage is the one lesson worth teaching.